There will be no change to the tough restrictions we're living with to flatten the coronavirus curve for at least the next 4 weeks. We will go to our reporter Jonathan Kersley in Canberra in a second, but let's recap on what we know at this stage. The National Cabinet has met this afternoon. This morning they started at 10 a.m. discussing a number of things on the agenda, including schools and a national policy, some advice for parents of when you should send your children back to school, and also safety recommendations in place to keep teachers safe in the classroom. The big focus today, though, is looking at a path beyond the restrictions that are currently in place. And we've heard from the government today that there will be no change in the next 4 weeks. But after that, they are looking for a possible exit strategy for some of these restrictions, and that life as we know it beyond COVID-19 will never be the same again for families, for businesses, for government and for financial policy. Let's bring in our reporter Jonathan Kersley in Canberra. Jonna, you were at that press conference. You heard it all play out. The government says we're doing the right thing at the moment, but we have to stay the course.
That's right. A long way to go yet. 4 weeks will be when National Cabinet revisits this idea of restrictions. The Prime Minister has repeatedly talked about the road out. What does that look like? What gets lifted first and when? Today, an indication after National Cabinet that there will be markers on that road, but the restrictions on our way of life will remain in place for at least the next 4 weeks as they are right now. The Prime Minister also has a 6-month timeline, he said, on the economic lifeline that the government has injected into the economy, which is hundreds of billions of dollars. We're seeing state governments by the day hand out hundreds of millions of dollars as well. Scott Morrison described today restarting what he described as high-value, low-risk elements of the economy first. That is where people won't interact much, but that could provide a much-needed rev-up for the nation's finances. He says what's needed is a high-level rapid response in case of a virus outbreak, more extensive testing and greater contact tracing. That is that new app which uses Bluetooth technology to inform you if someone you've been in close contact with has tested positive to coronavirus. Those 3 things, he says, need to be in place before any of these restrictions can be lifted. But when will cafes open? When will restaurants reopen? No clear answer on that. Cinemas, that remains unclear. The Prime Minister says National Cabinet is working through the details of what could open and when, but he still has a very stark warning. Some things which have become the norm, part of our way of life, will stay for a significant period of time.
The specifics of it are being worked through. I think it will be some time. I think social distancing, the washing of the hands, the doing all of those things, that is something we should do until we find a vaccine. So those sorts of things, the 1.5 metres, being conscious of your distancing with each other, that is something we're going to live with for the foreseeable future.
That's a pretty big and important line right there from the Prime Minister. Social distancing likely to stay until we have a vaccine. Another big issue for National Cabinet today was the issue of schools, Davina. No clear definitive path out there either in terms of a national approach. What we saw was some guidelines, but essentially the states and territories which are ultimately responsible for schools will decide what schools return and when, and how the students go about getting back into school, what some of the conditions are around pick-up and drop-off, and for teachers as well. The Prime Minister said as for his own daughters, well, he wants them back in a classroom in front of a teacher as soon as the school will allow it.
This is a state and territory issue. I want to make this really clear. The Commonwealth does not run public schools, state schools. They are run by state governments. They set the policy. They set the rules. Teachers are more at risk in the staff room than they are in the classroom when it comes to how the health advice plays out and the impact of this virus on children as opposed to teachers. That means that we need to have proper arrangements in place for teachers and other staff in schools, obviously to protect their work environment.
So let's see how that plays out over the next few weeks or so. The Prime Minister did also warn of some grim economic news in the months ahead. A huge part of that will be unemployment. Davina, we saw figures out for March today, up 0.1% to 5.2% nationally. But that survey didn't take into account when the borders were closed, the mass shutdowns that took place and the social distancing measures, which have forced many other businesses to close their doors. So the real unemployment figure is much higher. Treasury's warned it could hit 10% by the middle of the year.
Yeah, it's an ugly prediction, isn't it? OK, Jono, thank you. Well, coronavirus testing is being ramped up across Sydney, with the Premier setting a target of up to 4,500 tests per day. It comes as virus tracers are conducting more than 1,000 phone calls a day to track the spread of the infection.
Contact tracing is a key part of the strategy to reduce the spread of infection. And in New South Wales, we've implemented it quite early, and it appears to be working well.
There are now growing concerns of the spread of the virus at the Newmarch aged care home near Penrith. 5 of the 11 cases in New South Wales originated from that facility. Well, popular discount store Kmart will temporarily close some of its stores across the country to cope with the surge in demand for online orders. Stores will be converted into fulfilment centres to keep up with online home delivery services. Here in New South Wales, Top Ride has already closed its doors. An announcement on the future of Virgin Australia is likely within days after trading in the airline shares was halted for a week. With the federal government so far refusing to bail out Virgin, there is growing speculation a voluntary administrator will be appointed. We'll have more details from our reporter Charles Croucher coming up very shortly on that story. Well, New South Wales residents are confused about what they can and can't do during the state's virus lockdown. We're being urged to only grocery shop when necessary, but new data from YouGov has revealed 47% of people are going at least twice a week and 1 in 10 are shopping daily. Meanwhile, there's only been a 27% drop in people visiting beaches and parks. Our Channel 9 tower here at Willoughby has lit up to honour frontline health workers battling COVID-19. It's joined other landmarks, including Melbourne's Alfred Hospital and suburban homes, lighting up to stand in solidarity for our healthcare staff.